Well, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the City Bible Forum today. My name is Robert Martin, and I'm the Director of the City Bible Forum here in Melbourne, and I hope you enjoy our view and our venue here today. It's a beautiful spot. The City Bible Forum is a place where we stimulate discussion of the big questions of life. And this week we're thinking about the rat race. I'm not sure if any of you ever feel like a rat, but the rat race is an endless, self-defeating and pointless pursuit. For many, the daily grind of life in the city feels like a rat race. And today we're exploring the issue of life anxiety. Am I coping in the real world? So we've had a couple of presentations the last two, on Tuesday and Wednesday, and today is our final presentation in this series. And we're very delighted to have Al Stewart present on this topic. Now I've said to Al, if you're boring, then there's a nice view that you're competing with, so we'll be looking at the eyes just to see if you're paying attention or not. So to let you know what's going to happen today, I'm going to shortly introduce Al, then he's going to speak for around about 20-25 minutes or so, and then we'll open up the floor for questions, comments and discussion. This is a forum, and we do welcome all opinions, interaction and opinions. So we look forward to that time very much. You can ask questions just by standing up or raising your hand and asking a question, or you can submit questions via SMS and so on. It goes to my phone, and I'll be taking the questions, and we can look forward to that time very much. I always enjoy our forum time at the City Bible Forum. I am very conscious that this is your lunch hour, so we'll make sure that we're finished by about 10 minutes to 2 or so, so that you can get back to your desks for an afternoon of productive labour, or perhaps unproductive if that's your particular space. But you're welcome to stay longer as well. There's some lunch available for purchase and so on, and also a bookstore there where there's some books and so on available. Now I'll introduce our presenter today, Al Stewart. Al has a business background in marketing. He's worked for many years in Christian ministry. He now works for full-time for the City Bible Forum as a national communicator. So he's speaking regularly around Australia and internationally, engaging the big questions of life. You can follow him on Twitter at Baldy Pastor. Not quite sure why he's chosen that, but you can follow him there. So please welcome Al Stewart.
Thank you. This room was not designed by a public speaker, so you can tell too much competition. If your attention wanders and you look out the window, I'll think you're deep in thought about what I'm saying, so that's fine. All right. Topic today, life anxiety. Now a quick Google search will tell you 10% of Australians suffer from some kind of anxiety disorder. That's 10% suffer enough that it actually negatively affects their life. Although they say only 1/4 of those people, or 28%, seek treatment. So there's a huge percentage of the population actually living with real and, if you like, life-affecting anxiety. Now let me ask you, I'm not expecting hands up, but do you suffer from anxiety? And sometimes in my job, I get to talk to people about fairly personal things, and it's often you meet people who seem really competent, they're very high functioning and so on. In fact, I say they are competent, and yet in a quieter moment they'll confide in me that they suffer greatly from anxiety. Why? Well, when you think about it, anxiety is it's always about the future. Even if there's something wrong now, what you're worrying about is how that will affect your future. So life seems random and so much is unexpected and you don't know what's going to happen. It's a great piece of wisdom from an American baseballer. Next one, please. Yeah. Yogi Berra. True, that's his name, not the cartoon character, right? It's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And can't argue with that. Right? And what I'm trying to do today, I actually want you to invest 2 or 3 hours of your life in something. I'm not going to go for that long now. It's just a terrified look. Now, what I'm trying to motivate you to do is to read one of the little books in the Old Testament part of the Bible. It's a book called Ecclesiastes, and it's a book that looks at and kind of struggles with the meaning and purpose of life. It's just 12 short chapters, probably 12 pages of the Bible. And if you've never read it, let me tell you, it's gold. what that book is asking, Jerry might give us, here's the question that he asks. It's written about 1900 BC, something like that, either by King Solomon in ancient Israel or through the eyes of Solomon. And he asks this question: what do people gain from all their labours at which they toil under the sun? Now, the gain, that idea is kind of a commercial term. What's the bottom line? What's the cash value? You work really hard. I can see most of you have been at work today and you put in the hours and so on. We work hard and so on all our lives. What is it that we've really got? What is it that we can kind of hold on to? And here's something that's unusual. This little phrase, under the sun, that's the key to understanding the book. What's he mean by that? Well, there it is. If you just look at the world kind of the way it is, if you just look out under the sun, what you see with your eyes open and your common sense, how do you make sense of life? It's as if he says, well, look, close the rest of the Bible. If God hadn't spoken to us, if we didn't know anything about God, how would you make sense of life? And I think it's 27 times in the book he says, this is what I saw under the sun. Okay, so out there, eyes open, common sense, how would you try and make sense of life? And it's not a happy view that he has. So he says, at the beginning, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. If you've been here this week, this is the third time you've heard me say this, but that word, forgive me, but in case you've come in today, the word meaningless, a little bit hard to translate into English. It's the idea of a mist or a vapour. The Hebrew word hebel means a mist or a vapour, something that's there and then it's gone. Like, cold morning, I understand you get the cold morning in Melbourne here, you breathe out, there's kind of the mist that comes out of your mouth, it's there and then it's gone. And he's saying, that's what life's like. You can't hold on to it. What really lasts, what's permanent, what gives meaning and purpose? And that's why I've gone for the word meaningless. He's saying, life feels like a vapour. Now, we've come in, we're 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the book, and it's a bit like, today's a bit like if you've come in halfway through a movie to try and work out, wait a minute, he's doing it and he's what, like, okay. So if it doesn't all kind of fit together, that's okay. If you read from the beginning, it's a beautiful argument as he kind of takes you through, showing you that under the sun, nothing's permanent. It all kind of, it's pointless. Okay, let me walk you through the story so far, okay, the first half of the book or the first half of the movie. In chapter 1 he says, well, here's how it looks. The earth's here forever. We're ephemeral. We only last 5 minutes. Nothing ever changes. And guess what? No one will remember us. And so he sets out to look for, well, what does give meaning or purpose under the sun? Chapter 2, he says, well, maybe we'll find it in chasing pleasure. He says, well, pleasure's good. So you're not a killjoy. Pleasure's good, but you can't hold on to it. Something's good, yeah, and fun, but it slips through your fingers. Or maybe we'll find it in work. Well, the trouble is, work never quite delivers. You climb the ladder and then maybe the ladder wasn't resting against the right wall. Or in possessions. That is, you accumulate all this stuff and guess what? You die and you leave it all behind to someone who hasn't worked for it. Or in chapter 3, we saw yesterday, there's seasons in our life. There's a time to be born and a time to die and a time to weep and a time to laugh. And we don't control those seasons. We can't control the seasons of our lives. And he says God's put eternity in our hearts. We just intuitively feel like there's more than just this. Or at least most people do. And yet we die like the animals. Is it any wonder there's angst in our life? Then in chapters 4 through to 7, he looks out under the sun and sees all the suffering that's in our world. And this might have been written 2,500 years ago, but very little has changed. He talks about the way people treat each other under the sun. Oppression, envy, loneliness. You can't straighten what's twisted. What I mean is you can't fix the problems in our world. And so his solution there is, well, don't think about it too much. Enjoy life if you can. All right. Now let me take you through today, chapters 7 through to 11. And it'll be a bit kind of, well, there's a kind of structure. I think I've put that in your program is some of the text that we'll look at. And it's a little bit of a juggle. If it doesn't all make sense, think of it like one of those tasting plates. You just get a bite here and there, okay? So how to survive under the sun. In chapter 7 to 11, he says, well, if this is all there is, how do we try and make sense of it? So here's a kind of possible structure. In chapter 7 he talks about the character of people. Chapter 8 he talks about the need for good government. Chapter 8, life's a mystery but enjoy it. And then chapters 9 and 11, life's a mystery but hey, work and try things. Now let me just give you a few little tastes of what he says, okay? And sometimes I might ask you to follow. There's the text is there in your program. On the back of the A5 sheet is chapter 9. So let me kind of push through. If you don't get all the detail, don't worry. I want you to get the vibe, okay? All right. What's the first thing he says about life under the sun? Is unjust. People don't get what they deserve. You see chapter 7 verse 15, he says this, "In this meaningless life of mine, I've seen both of these, the righteous perishing in their righteousness and the wicked living long in their wickedness." So you don't necessarily get what you deserve in life. There's a million different examples of that, but here's one that I remember. Now this man lived in Sydney, forgive me, but does anyone recognise that man? Oh, well done, sir. Yeah, Victor Chang. The man's a medical hero. He was one of the pioneers of... I'll take the jacket off, makes a bit more. One of the pioneers of heart transplants in Australia. He did a heart transplant on the youngest ever heart transplant patient, Fiona Coote. She was 14 years old in 1984. I checked this morning, she's still alive in her mid-40s and won the Order of Australia and a whole lot of things. She's had a full and rich life. I think he did something like 147 heart transplants. You can see what else I do for a living. Heart transplants. Okay. But you know the tragedy? In 1991, some of you will be too young to remember this, but in 1991 he was shot dead in a Sydney suburb in a botched robbery attempt. Here we go. 2 Malaysian men killed him in some kind of crazy extortion thing. The prosecution alleged the plan had been to abduct Dr. Chang, tie him up with his family in his home at Clontarf and threaten to hang them to coerce Chang to withdraw money from the bank. In his ruling, Supreme Court Judge Justice Slattery said it was an absurd, improbable plan, always doomed to failure. The 2 guys who did it were not rocket scientists. One of them left their wallet at the scene. Okay, true. But you know what? Here's where the injustice comes in. That the first man, Philip Chun T. Lim, has finished his sentence and was sent home 2 years ago. And the second man, Chu Seng Liu, is now aged 69. He finished his sentence and was sent home last year, back to Malaysia. And they're still okay, they're still alive, and Victor Chang is still dead. Next thing that Ecclesiastes says is life seems random. So much of life seems to come from just luck. Have a look at chapter 9. It'll be on the back of the A5 sheet. So look at verse 11. He said, "I've seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favour to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all." Many people will work all their lives, try and get together just enough money to maybe own a home or to get through life, and yet each week someone wins millions of dollars in Oz Lotto. Bang, just luck. So in one that I checked, one of the big super draws, the journalist had worked out that the chance of winning an Oz Lotto jackpot was 1 in 45,379,620. Incredibly lucky if you won it. And I did a quick Google search, and I found on the 23rd. No, sorry, that's wrong. Now I realise it was 2009. A $59 million draw. No one claimed it. Now you think, how incredibly lucky would you have to be to win the lotto, right? And yet the winning person never came forward. So is that incredible luck that you won it? Or incredible bad luck that you misplaced the ticket, or you didn't check, or you went overseas, or do you think, is that really lucky or really unlucky? Or let me give you another example. This man, Stephen Hawking. He's been lucky enough to be born with the finest mind since Einstein, they say. The greatest physicist, of our generation. Incredibly lucky. He wrote a book called A Brief History of Time. Right book in the right place, went multi, top of the list bestseller, made him a multi-millionaire. Incredibly lucky. Except Stephen Hawking has motor neurone disease. Incredibly unlucky. Except motor neurone disease usually kills you before you're 21. Stephen Hawking is now 71. So is he incredibly lucky or unlucky, or how do you try and make sense of that? If you're a reader, let me just really quickly say, there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell. Anyone ever read anything that he's... Yeah? Okay. He wrote a book called The Tipping Point, which is brilliant. This one, Outliers, is about people who are super high performers in sport, in business, in politics and so on. And what he's basically saying is that luck plays an incredible role and significance in how, being a high performer. So he lists the 75 richest people in the history of the planet. I don't know how they worked it out, but someone's worked it out. 20% of those people were born within a 10-year period in one country. Born in the 1830s. Anyone want to guess what country?
US.
The USA. Well done. Why? Because they just were on the right place to catch the wave when the USA economy started. And Bill Gates, very, very clever, but there were about 8 or 9 things in his life that lined up perfectly that meant he was on the wave to so much of its luck. It's a great book if you want a good Christmas present for someone. Okay. Now he's saying luck. So much of life is luck. And you know what? It's not always good. See verse 12? Moreover, no one knows when their hour will come, as fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so people are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. It's on the news every day, isn't it? Remember the Boxing Day tsunami, or the terrible thing that's happened with the hurricane in the Philippines? It happens every day in Australia in just a kind of smaller way. This number. Anyone want to guess what that number is? One. Oh, well done, you're on the ball. That's the number of people last year, the number of road users in Australia who died. 1,310. You know the strange thing about a road death is this. You never get any notice. It's not as if you get 24 hours notice it's going to happen. You get 2 seconds notice. If you got 10 seconds notice, you could stop it. And so 1,310. I still remember being 10 years old, standing beside my mum when she got the phone call to say that her sister and niece had been killed in a car accident, and I changed our family forever. Now, life's unjust, random, things unexpected. Aren't you glad you came along today? All right. But just to cheer you up, there is a level playing field, he says. Here's the level playing field, and that is we all end up on this playing field. Well, actually, we all end up under it. What's he say? Have a look at chapter 9, verse 1. So I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands, but no one knows whether love or hate awaits them. All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, the clean and the unclean, those who offer sacrifices and those who do not. As it is with the good, so with the sinful. As it is with those who take oaths, so with those who are afraid to take them. This is the evil in everything that happens under the sun. Notice he's saying this, under the sun, just what you see. The same destiny overtakes all. The hearts of people, moreover, are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live, and afterwards they join the dead. Everyone who is among the living has hope. Even a live dog is better off than a dead lion. For the living know they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. Their love, their hate and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. Now what he's saying, it's part of an argument, and he's pushing. If this is all there is, it's all kind of meaningless, because it doesn't matter what you've done in your life, it doesn't matter who you are, everyone just ends up in the ground. That's his point. What's the point in the long run? So, he says this, if this is what life under the sun is like, okay, now I'll go back. Okay. If this is what life under the sun is like, he's saying it's unjust, it's random, unexpected things happen, and we're all going to die. Therefore, what? Well, he's got a few, it's funny, some of the advice he gives is a little bit kind of cynical, a little bit kind of, well, let me show you, and you have to think about it. You might read these chapters yourself. First thing he says is, well, if that's what life's like, don't wear yourself out. Take chapter 7, verse 16. He said, don't be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? Don't be over wicked. Do not be a fool. Why die before your time? And he said, just kind of go for the soft middle option. Once again, he's saying, under the sun, if this is all there is. Now, the next one I've got here, don't fight authority, but I realise that's the wrong label. What I think he's saying, have I got chapter 8 on printed out there somewhere? Chapter 8, verses 2 and 3.
Yeah.
I think what he's saying is, don't stand up for a bad cause, choose your battles. He's saying, obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. In other words, he's not saying don't stand up for any cause. He's just saying choose your battles very carefully. Which particular hill do you want to die on? Don't be courageous, I guess. Some of you may be old enough to remember the British comedy Yes Minister. Anyone? Okay. Brilliantly done. Brilliant British comedy. In the middle is Jim Hacker, who's one of the ministers in the British government. And on the right there is Sir Humphrey. And when the minister is about to do something, make some political decision, the clearest way to stop him was for Humphrey to say, that's very courageous, Minister. And the minister would say, courageous, whoa, and take a step. It's a little bit of the cynicism that's here. Now, one other thing he says is, don't take things to heart. I think we've got 721 on the screen. This is interesting. We've got the next one? Yeah. Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you, for you know that in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. What's he saying? Sometimes it's better not to listen too carefully to things people say, or just to let it go. Why? We all say dumb things. You know that I've said dumb things, you've said dumb things, someone else says something that's kind of upset you, or let it go. Let it go. Well, he does finish up with saying, if you can, enjoy life. See, look at chapter 9, verse 7. Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Well, God will let you do this. Always be clothed in white and always anoint your head with oil. So there you go, folks. Wear a white shirt, have a shiny head. Now, what's the significance? What's the significance of the white shirt, dressed in white? I think it is, if you're used to working, agricultural labour, they worked hard in those days, you don't wear a white shirt when you work. It's the idea, whenever you can, have a party. Okay, dress up, wear your party clothes, that kind of thing. Verse 9, verse 9. Enjoy life with your wife whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. All your meaningless days, for this is your lot in life and your toilsome labour under the sun. In other words, just looking out there, you might not be able to make sense of it, but hey, enjoy it if you can. Verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead where you are going, there is neither working nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. I remember when I was 23 years old and working marketing work. I was working for a company, Berger Paints, selling paint to people who didn't really want it, I guess, or didn't need it. Anyway, I walked in, young marketing graduate, walked into my boss's office and told him, Brian, I'm going to give up my job and I'm going to do Christian ministry stuff, like do a trainee Christian ministry thing at New South Uni. And he didn't say anything for about 20, 30 seconds, which is a really long time when there's just silence in the room. I'm going to do this, and he paused, and he looked at me and said, well, when you're dead for a long time, so you better do what you want to do. And then he walked out. Now, he's absolutely right. That's what he's saying. Whatever you do it with all your might. Now, once again, still operating under the sun, you could say, well, you know, this kind of, you could be paralysed by anxiety, or cynicism, or the kind of pointlessness of it all, and so on. But he's not a killjoy. And he says, well, you can't just sit in a darkened room and do nothing. You've got to have a go. And I really look at chapter 11. I think it'll be on, is it on the right-hand side of the, yeah, inside right-hand side. These words are gold. He says, you've got to have a go. You've got to take a chance. You've got to take some risks. So, chapter 11, verse 1. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days, you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. What's he saying? Well, you've got to invest in things, the idea of trading and so on, and invest in 7, 8. What's that? Diversify your risk. Okay, so you've got to invest, you've got to do things. You don't know what's going to happen. Hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So invest widely. What do you reckon verse 3 means? If clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. Any thoughts? What do you reckon that means?
Look for signs.
Sorry?
Look for signs.
Look for signs. Yeah, maybe. I think he's saying certain things in life are just going to happen. Okay? If we're in a different, you know what happens. You've seen the bumper sticker. Okay? I can't say it. All right. But the clouds are full of water. It's just going to happen. It rains. Where a tree falls, boom. That's it. That's where it's going to lie. And I think what he's saying is this: there are certain things that have happened in the past that you cannot change. And that's the way life is, and you've got to step over it and move on. Okay? As I've often heard my daughters remind one another of something or other, deal with it, get over it. Okay? They'll say to each other, as only siblings will. Okay? And there's certain things, there's heartaches in our life and things that have happened, and guess what? The tree's fallen, you cannot change it, step over it, move on. Now usually, if it's heartache, you can be a little more gentle in saying that. Okay? Sisters tend to be pretty blunt with each other, I've noticed, but anyway. But that's the idea. Now, we've got heartaches, we've got things that have happened that we wish they hadn't, etc., but you can't change the past. Step over it, move on. Now, verse 4 and 5 is interesting. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at clouds will not reap. The idea of reaping is harvest. Now, I don't know if you've spent your time in the country. But what's the last thing you want at harvest time? Rain. Rain. Because rain destroys crops and devalues the harvest and so on. But what's he saying? Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. In other words, if you wait for something to be 100% right, you'll never do it. Okay? And so there comes a time, well, should we, shouldn't we? It's not going. Sometimes you take a risk and do it. All right. Now, life under the sun, random, unexpected, and so on. We're going to die, and you've got to take risks. Now, Ecclesiastes gives you an answer at the end. In chapter 12, he gives you, in just a few verses, an answer that actually changes everything. It'll change, if you embrace it, it'll change the way you see the world. But I'm not going to tell you what it is today, because I want you to go away and read it from the beginning, and you'll get the impact of the argument of, yes, I see the significance of the answer. But let me just for a moment, I've got 3.5 minutes or something before Rob jumps up. Let me just take you and say, if you open the rest of the Bible, if you actually take the rest of the Bible seriously and say, there's an extra message, and that is God has spoken to us. And we don't live just under the sun. God's actually spoken to us. In fact, God became one of us and lived among us. And if you'd been there 28 lifetimes ago in the Middle East, we know where and when, you could have been there and spoken with him, heard him teach, could have seen him crucified and rise again. God's entered into our world. And here's what's interesting, is Jesus, as he taught and so on, his compassion for us, if you like, and our worries and so on. So if you've ever read the Sermon on the Mount, it only takes 10 minutes to read it, Jesus talks about anxiety and worries, and he tells us why we need not worry. And the New Testament writers often talk about anxiety and our worries and so on. And here's what's interesting. The New Testament writers link the idea of anxiety with humility. anxiety with humility. Let me show you what I mean. So this will be on the bottom, is it the bottom of the program? Yep, okay, bottom right-hand corner. But here's what Peter, who was one of Jesus' closest friends, the Apostle Peter, here's what he writes in his first letter to the Christians. And you see humility and anxiety linked. Humble yourselves therefore under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. And now, how are they related? What he's saying is, humble yourselves therefore under God's mighty hand. What's humility? Well, in this context, humility is actually saying, well, he's God and I'm not. It's not all about me, and I'm not the master of the universe. I'm not even the master of my own little universe. He's God, I'm not. And I'll treat him like God and realise I'm not. Now, that may seem pretty obvious, but most people don't do it. Okay. So, to humble yourself under God's mighty hand and acknowledge he's God, I'm not. That he may lift you up in due time. It's the idea that if you'll humble yourself before God and acknowledge him and live with him as God, God will lift you up. Big theme through the Bible, that God puts down the proud and lifts up the humble. And you say, well, that's kind of that's the hard part of the message, yes. But you notice the flip side of humility, saying he's God, we're not, or he's God, I'm not, is this: cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And that is, if we acknowledge that he's God and he is in charge of all this, I can trust him with things and leave my anxiety with him. And Jesus says, follow him, trust him, he will tell us the best way to live, and he will look after us. Now, if you follow Jesus, the more that you can learn that, the more you can let go of anxiety. It's hard to learn, and look, if you follow Jesus and you feel anxious, I don't want to add guilt to anxiety, okay? Alright? I'm just saying, the more we can learn, don't feel guilty about being anxious, okay? The more that you can learn that, the more we can actually let go of anxiety and give that to him. Now, I'll admit, as you live day by day, you can't always see why God does what he does. And the Bible tells us, Jesus assures us that, yeah, God has things under control. And in our own personal lives, I've found usually you can only see the hand of God in hindsight. Day by day, it just looks like chaos and whatever and anxiety. And as you look back, say, oh, yes, I see that God had things in hand and I see why this has happened and so on. There are some things you won't see until eternity, why they happened. All right. And so, Jesus promises he'll look after us if we follow him, if we'll trust him. And I ask you if you've got, well, actually, Rob's got a way that you could read Ecclesiastes with some other people and talk about it. Let me hand back to Rob.
Sure, thanks very much, Al.